I remember that evening so vividly, even though I'd give just about anything to erase it from my mind. It started off as a pretty normal day, at least, I thought it was. My name's Ben, by the way, and I've been married to Lily for about 10 years now. She's always been this energetic, free-spirited kind of person, with a passion for dancing that's nothing short of contagious. She teaches dance, performs at events, and she's always surrounded by music and movement. It's one of the things I fell in love with about her. But sometimes, that world of hers feels so far removed from mine. That particular day, Lily had mentioned she'd be going to a party organized by some of the dancers she works with. It wasn't unusual. She's always been the social butterfly in our relationship, while I'm the one who prefers a quiet evening at home. I offered to drive her to the party because, well, I guess that's just what you do for the person you love, right? She waved it off, though, saying her brother John was headed in the same direction and would give her a lift. At the time, I didn't think much of it. John's her older brother, a dependable guy who's always been there for her. When I got home that evening, it was just me and our daughter, Maddie. She's 7, with Lily's bright eyes and endless curiosity about the world. She met me at the door with her usual excitement, chattering about her day at school and the new art project she was working on. I've always loved these moments with her. Just the two of us, talking about nothing and everything at the same time. As we sat in the living room, Maddie said something that caught me off guard. She asked who the uncle was that her mom had gone with earlier. At first, I laughed it off. Didn't you recognize Uncle John? I teased, thinking she must have been mistaken. But Maddie shook her head, her little face scrunched up in that serious way kids get when they're trying to make a point. No, Daddy, she said, her voice firm. It wasn't Uncle John. His car is gray. This one was black. I paused for a moment, caught off guard by how certain she seemed. I told myself it was just a kid's observation, nothing to worry about. Maybe John had borrowed someone else's car, or maybe Maddie had just gotten the colors mixed up. Still, something about the way she said it lingered in the back of my mind, like an itch I couldn't quite reach. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, at least on the surface. Maddie and I had dinner, watched one of her favorite shows, and then I tucked her into bed. But all the while, that little comment about the car kept replaying in my head. When Lily finally came home, it was late, later than I'd expected. I greeted her with a warm hug, and she wrapped her arms around me like she always did. She smelled of perfume, but there was something else mixed in, something I couldn't quite place. It was a strong scent, unfamiliar, and it set off a faint alarm in my mind. I tried to shake it off, not wanting to jump to conclusions. Jokingly, I mentioned the smell, asking if she'd been around someone wearing a lot of cologne. She laughed it off, brushing the comment aside as if it were nothing. Maybe one of the dancers got a little carried away, she said with a chuckle. We ended up in the kitchen, drinking tea like we often did at the end of a long day. I asked her about the party, keeping my tone casual. She told me it was great, that everyone had a good time, and that John had dropped her off just as planned. But as she spoke, I couldn't help noticing the little inconsistencies in her story, the way she hesitated ever so slightly, or how her eyes seemed to avoid mine when she mentioned John. I didn't say anything that night. I didn't want to believe there could be anything wrong, but deep down, I knew this was the beginning of something I couldn't ignore. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I don't know why, I just couldn't sleep. Lily was still curled up under the blankets, her hair spread out across the pillow like a painting. She looked peaceful, content, and for a fleeting moment, I felt guilty for doubting her. Maybe I was just overthinking things. Maybe Maddie had been mistaken about the car, and maybe that cologne really had come from someone at the party. But then I remembered the hesitation in Lily's voice the night before and how she had avoided my eyes when I asked about John. Something still didn't sit right with me, and I couldn't shake it. I decided to push the thoughts aside, at least for now. After breakfast, I dropped Maddie off at school and headed to work. It was a busy day, but I couldn't focus. My mind kept drifting back to the night before. At lunchtime, I decided to text John, just something casual to see if he'd mentioned giving Lily a ride to the party. I asked how he was doing and casually brought up that Lily had mentioned they drove together the night before. I also asked if everything had gone okay, hoping the question would prompt him to share more details. I stared at my phone, waiting for the 3 little dots to appear. It felt like forever, but when his reply finally came, it wasn't what I expected. John's response caught me off guard. He said he wasn't sure what I was talking about and mentioned he hadn't seen Lily the day before. Then, almost as if sensing something was off, he asked if everything was okay. I read the message twice, then a third time, as if rereading it might somehow change the words. My chest tightened, and my mind started racing. If John hadn't been with her, then who had? I decided not to reply right away. I didn't want to tip anyone off that I was starting to put pieces together. Instead, I told myself I needed more information, something solid to make sense of it all. That evening, I picked Maddie up from school. She was her usual cheerful self, chatting about her day and showing me a drawing she'd made in art class. I tried to stay present for her, but my mind was elsewhere. After dinner, while Lily was in the shower, Maddie wandered into the living room where I was sitting. She climbed onto the couch next to me, resting her head on my shoulder. "Daddy," she said softly, "why did Mommy say she was with Uncle John?" Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I looked down at her, trying to keep my face calm. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" She tilted her head, her little brow furrowed. When I asked her where she was going, she said Uncle John was picking her up. But it wasn't him. I saw the man. I froze. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. "What do you mean you saw him?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. She nodded, her small face serious. Then she added that she had looked out the window when Mommy left. She described the car as black and mentioned that the man wasn't Uncle John. He had short hair and wore a big coat. The room felt like it was spinning. Maddie's innocent description was like a puzzle piece falling into place, but the picture it was forming was one I didn't want to see. I hugged her tightly, forcing myself to smile. "Thank you for telling me, Maddie. You're such a good girl." When Lily came out of the shower, she found me in the kitchen, cleaning up the dishes. I turned to her and smiled, as if nothing was wrong. But inside, I was a mess. "Hey," I said casually, "I texted John today. He said he didn't see you yesterday. What's that about?" Her reaction was quick, too quick. She laughed nervously and waved a hand. "Oh, he must have forgotten. You know how he is, always busy with work. I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it." But her laugh didn't reach her eyes. There was something forced about it, something that made my stomach churn. I didn't press her further. Not yet. Instead, I decided to play along, to act like I believed her. That night, as Lily slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I knew I couldn't keep ignoring the signs. There was something going on, something she wasn't telling me, and I was determined to find out what it was. What I didn't know was how much more complicated and painful it was all about to become. The next day started off ordinary enough. I went about my morning routine like I always did, but there was this weight sitting in my chest. It felt like I was carrying around a secret, though technically, it wasn't even mine. Yet, after breakfast, Lily kissed me on the cheek before heading out. She said she was going to her dance studio to prep for an upcoming showcase. She was all smiles and sweetness, her usual bubbly self, but something about her felt rehearsed, like she was sticking to a script. I waited until she was gone, then grabbed my phone. I wasn't proud of myself for what I was about to do, but I needed answers. I texted her best friend, Carrie. I mentioned that Lily had told me they were talking about the showcase and asked if there was any chance she'd be at the studio today. I didn't have to wait long for a reply. She told me she wasn't involved with the showcase this time and hadn't been at the studio in weeks. My hands tightened around my phone. Lily wasn't at the studio with Carrie. So where was she? I couldn't let this stew in my mind any longer. I decided I needed to take action, quietly, carefully. After dropping Maddie off at school, I drove past the dance studio to see if Lily's car was there. It wasn't. Feeling my pulse quicken, I parked a block away and sat there for a while, just thinking. I glanced at my watch. Maddie's school day wouldn't end for hours, and I had time. Time to dig a little deeper. I started by driving around nearby spots where Lily might have gone. Coffee shops, parks, even the shopping plaza we frequented on weekends. Nothing. Her car was nowhere to be found, and each empty lot only added to the knot tightening in my chest. Finally, I decided to head back home. As I turned onto our street, I noticed something odd. A delivery truck was parked in front of our house. Not unusual, except I hadn't ordered anything, and Lily certainly hadn't mentioned expecting a package. I parked down the block and watched as the delivery driver placed a medium-sized box on our porch. He rang the doorbell, waited a moment, and then left. Once the truck pulled away, I stepped out of the car and approached the house, my curiosity mounting. The box had no markings, just Lily's name written in black marker across the top. My hands hesitated on the cardboard for a moment before I picked it up and carried it inside. Setting it on the kitchen table, I debated whether to open it. It wasn't addressed to me, and snooping felt wrong. But hadn't I already crossed that line? I grabbed a knife and carefully slit the tape. Inside was strange. The first thing I pulled out was a red scarf. It was silky, expensive looking, but definitely not Lily's style. Beneath it, there was a small velvet jewelry box. My pulse quickened as I flipped it open, revealing a delicate gold necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. And under that, a stack of Polaroids. I almost didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. The photos were of Lily. She was smiling in some, laughing in others. But they weren't the kind of pictures I had ever taken of her. The lighting, the angles, they were candid. And then there was one that froze me in place. Lily was sitting at a table, across from the man I'd seen leaving the boutique hotel. The same tailored suit, the same perfectly styled hair. He was leaning close, whispering something in her ear, and she was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. My head spun, and my breath came in short, shallow bursts. I dropped the photos back in the box like they were on fire. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd just uncovered. Before I could think of what to do next, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a call from Lily. I stared at the screen, debating whether to answer. Finally, I picked up, my voice strained as I greeted her. She sounded as cheerful as ever, asking how my day was going. I forced a smile, even though she couldn't see it, and told her everything was fine, that I was just running errands. She mentioned that she was busy too, as usual, and that she'd be home late again tonight, asking me not to wait up. I swallowed, my throat dry, and told her to take her time. As soon as she hung up, I stared down at the box, the evidence sitting in front of me. My mind reeled with possibilities. Who had sent it? And why? One thing was clear. Whoever had sent this knew more about my wife's life than I did. I sat there, staring at the open box like it was some kind of cursed relic, trying to steady my breathing. The photos, the necklace, the scarf. It was all too much, too calculated. Someone wanted me to see this. Someone wanted me to know. But why? And who? I stuffed everything back into the box, resealed it with tape, and shoved it into the hall closet behind some old coats. I needed to think, needed to clear my head. But as I paced around the kitchen, I kept coming back to the same question. Was this some sort of warning? Or a trap? I decided I couldn't sit idly by anymore. Grabbing my keys, I headed back out, not entirely sure where I was going, but driven by an urgency I couldn't shake. My first thought was to track down that man. The one from the photos, the one who had been with Lily. I ended up driving back to the boutique hotel, hoping against all odds that I might spot him again. I parked across the street, keeping a low profile, and waited. Minutes turned into an hour, and just as I was starting to feel foolish for even trying, I saw him. He stepped out of the hotel, dressed just as sharply as before, and got into a sleek black car parked by the curb. My pulse quickened as I started my engine, keeping a safe distance as I tailed him through the city. The drive was tense. He took a series of turns that felt deliberate, almost like he was trying to shake anyone who might be following. Eventually, he pulled into the parking lot of a quiet little cafe tucked away in a less busy part of town. I parked a block away and watched as he went inside. For a moment, I considered just leaving, convincing myself I'd gone far enough. But then I saw her. Lily. She walked into the cafe like she'd done it 100 times before, her steps confident, her expression relaxed. She didn't even glance around to check if anyone was watching. I felt a strange mix of emotions, betrayal, anger, confusion. But what really caught me off guard was the way they greeted each other. No kiss, no lingering touch, no obvious display of affection. I watched them closely, every nerve in my body firing off like an alarm. There was something unnervingly casual about the way they interacted, comfortable, familiar, but not affectionate in the way lovers might be. I couldn't sit there and watch anymore. My hands trembling, I opened my car door and stepped out, my feet carrying me toward the cafe before I even realized what I was doing. The little bell above the door jingled as I walked in, the sound cutting through the low hum of conversation inside. Lily didn't notice me at first, but then her eyes flicked up and she froze. The color drained from her face as her gaze locked with mine. "Ben?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The man next to her turned, his brow furrowing in confusion as he looked between us. I didn't say anything at first, just stood there, the weight of my discovery pressing down on me. Finally, I broke the silence. "So this is where you've been," I said, my voice cold and steady, though inside I felt anything but calm. Lily's mouth opened and closed, searching for words that didn't come. The man beside her glanced at her, then back at me, his expression unreadable. She began, but I cut her off. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought I saw regret in her eyes. But then the man beside her spoke, his voice low and firm. He suggested we step outside, his tone even, almost too calm, like he was trying to defuse a bomb that was about to go off. I turned to him, my fists clenching at my sides. "Who the hell are you?" He didn't flinch, meeting my glare with a calm I found infuriating. "A friend," he said simply. "A friend?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Is that what you're calling it now, Lily?" She stood up, her hands outstretched, almost as if she were trying to placate me. She pleaded, asking me to talk about it, her voice soft but filled with urgency. I asked her what we were supposed to talk about, whether it was the fact that she'd been sneaking around behind my back or that she had been lying to me. The words came out harsh, and I couldn't stop them. The other patrons in the cafe were staring now, their conversations halting as they watched the scene unfold. But I didn't care. Lily said my name again, her voice trembling. She tried to reassure me, insisting that it wasn't what I thought, though her words shook with uncertainty. I demanded to know what was going on, my voice breaking as I asked what it was. From where I was standing, everything seemed pretty damn clear. She hesitated, her eyes quickly darting to the man beside her. He gave her a small nod, almost like he was urging her to speak. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely audible as she said she hadn't wanted me to find out like this. I felt the anger shift, replaced by a desperate need for answers. I asked her what exactly I was supposed to have found out. She didn't respond right away. Lily's hand lightly brushed my arm, her voice trembling as she asked me to step outside and go to the car with her. She said she'd explain everything, away from prying eyes and the whispers of strangers. There was a desperation in her tone that made my anger falter, if only slightly. I hesitated but nodded, following her out of the cafe. The drive back to the car was silent, save for the sound of my own ragged breathing. When we finally reached it, she stopped and leaned against the passenger door, her hands trembling as she fumbled to unlock it. I climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel tightly, while she sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap like a guilty child. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Her lips parted, but the words didn't come. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she began. She looked at me, her voice trembling as she admitted that she hadn't known how to tell me. She said she was scared that I would hate her. Tears welled in her eyes, and she looked away, staring out the windshield as if avoiding my gaze could make this easier. I demanded to know what she was talking about, my voice coming out sharp, more of a bark than an actual question. She took a deep breath, her words tumbling out in a rush. She admitted that she had been offered money, a lot of money, $30,000, to be exact. She explained it was for a private dance and one night, just one night. Her voice broke, and she covered her face with her hands as sobs racked her body. I sat there, stunned, the weight of her confession pressing down on me like a lead blanket. I asked if she really did it. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. She swore she hadn't wanted to do it, but said she felt like we needed the money. Her words faltered, and she broke off, her hands shaking as she reached toward me. She admitted that she thought she could handle it, that she could compartmentalize it. All for us. For our family. For us. The phrase seemed empty, almost mocking. My voice rose as I asked if she could hear herself. How could she sell herself for money and think I didn't deserve to know? The betrayal cut deeper with every word. Her sobs grew louder, her words coming out in gasps. She said she knew I'd never agree, that I was too proud, too stubborn. She admitted she thought she could shield me from it, from the shame of what she had done. The anger in me was a storm, but beneath it was a strange, bitter relief. At least now I knew the truth, however ugly, however painful. I shook my head, trying to process her words. I asked about the man, the one she had been with. Who was he, and what part did he play in all of this? She answered quickly, almost too quickly, insisting that he was just the driver. She explained that he picked her up, took her to the hotel, and handed her the money afterward. She swore he meant nothing to her, but her words did little to calm the storm inside me. And the box? I asked, my voice cold. The one that showed up at our house? She blinked, her confusion evident. The box? Yes, Lily. The goddamn box. The one with the photos and the necklace and all the other garbage. She shook her head, her expression shifting to one of fear. She quickly responded, insisting that she didn't know about the box. She said it must have been sent by the man, the one who had offered her the money. He wanted to hurt me, she explained, to hurt us. Her words only added to the confusion and anger already swirling inside me. Her words landed like a punch to the gut. My anger flared, but this time it wasn't just directed at her. It was at this faceless man who had toyed with our lives for his amusement. We sat there in silence for what felt like an eternity, the air between us thick with tension and unspoken words. Finally, I started the car and drove us home. Neither of us spoke during the ride, the quiet filled only with the hum of the engine and the occasional sniffle from Lily. When we got home, I walked straight to our bedroom, grabbed a duffel bag, and started packing. Lily followed me, her pleas echoing in the room as she begged me to stay. She cried out, her hands gripping my arm tightly as if trying to hold on to something, anything. She pleaded with me, her voice breaking as she admitted that she had messed up, that she had made the worst mistake of her life. She told me she loved me, she loved our family, and begged me not to leave. I turned to her, my expression hard. I need time, Lily. I need space to think. I can't look at you right now without feeling everything. Her sobs grew louder as I zipped up the bag and slung it over my shoulder. Without another word, I walked out the door, leaving her standing there, broken and pleading. The days passed slowly. I stayed at a cheap hotel, keeping my distance from Lily but staying in contact with our daughter. I picked her up from school, took her to the park, tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy for her sake. Lily called every day, her messages filled with apologies and desperate attempts to make amends. I ignored most of them, unsure if I could ever forgive her. But her words lingered, gnawing at me in the quiet moments when I was alone. Eventually, I agreed to meet her. We chose a neutral place, a park we used to visit when we were first dating. When I saw her, she looked different, tired, hollow. As soon as we were close enough, she threw her arms around me, clinging to me like I was her lifeline. I hesitated, then wrapped my arms around her, the anger in me softening just a little. She whispered an apology, her voice thick with emotion. She knew she didn't deserve my forgiveness, but she promised she would do whatever it took to make things right. The words hung in the air, heavy with regret, as she looked at me, waiting for a response that I wasn't sure I could give. I told her that this wasn't something that could be fixed overnight. What she had done, I explained, had broken something in me, something in us. She nodded, her eyes filled with regret as she spoke. She knew what she had done, and she said she would spend the rest of her life trying to put it all back together, if I would let her. I took a deep breath, the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on me. I'm willing to try, I said finally, for us, for our family, but it's going to take time. Her relief was palpable, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. We still had a long road ahead of us, but maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. When I moved back home, things weren't perfect. There were awkward silences, painful conversations, and moments of doubt. But there were also moments of connection, of love, of hope. Lily went out of her way to prove her commitment, attending counseling sessions, being transparent about everything, and working tirelessly to regain my trust. And slowly, piece by piece, we began to rebuild what had been broken.